I watched $22,000 of winter supplies burn to ash while 4 HOA board members stood grinning beside the fire like they had just won the lottery. Those supplies were never luxury items or hobby stockpiles. They were survival resources for my 78-year-old mother with dementia, living through brutal Colorado mountain winters. Cheryl Kensington called the destruction emergency cleanup while supervising workers who tossed propane tanks, canned food, medical kits, and generator fuel straight into the flames behind my house. What Cheryl never understood was that my grandfather's 1962 deed granted the Garrison family exclusive authority over Pine Valley's spillway, controlling every drop of water, feeding their artificial luxury lake. Standing there watching everything burn, I remembered that water rights law favors patience far more than anger. My name is Wade Garrison, 52 years old, heavy equipment operator, and the fourth generation responsible for managing Pine Valley's spillway system. Up here at 8,000 feet in the Colorado Rockies, winter preparation isn't paranoia. It's the difference between surviving storms and freezing when roads close for weeks. My mother Sarah depends on routine more than anything, because dementia turns the smallest disruption into a terrifying crisis. Every labeled medicine container and supply shelf in our basement had been organized the exact same way for 15 years. When Cheryl's crew burned that system to ash, they didn't just destroy supplies, they shattered my mother's sense of safety. Pine Valley began as my grandfather's ranch, before developers built the lake community. Around the original creek bed in 1985, Grandpa sold land for homes, but kept one critical right, written clearly into the deed. The Spillway and Flood Drainage Authority always remained under Garrison family control. Most residents never read the original property agreements closely enough to understand that detail. Cheryl Kensington certainly hadn't. Cheryl moved into Pine Valley 3 years earlier with designer coats, expensive SUVs, and a smile that always felt slightly rehearsed. She quickly gathered 3 allies on the HOA board, who shared her vision of turning the quiet mountain community into an exclusive resort. Trevor Ashworth flipped houses and owned the largest mansion beside the lake. Marissa Vale rented luxury vacation cabins to wealthy tourists escaping city life. Douglas Whitfield managed short-term rentals and handled most of the board's paperwork. Together, they turned the HOA into something closer to a private corporation. Their favorite tactic was targeting residents who lacked resources to fight back. October 23rd became the day they decided my family would be their next project. I drove my mother to Denver for a medical appointment that morning. 6 hours later, we returned to smoke rising from our backyard. My mother smelled burning plastic before we even reached the driveway. Her hands started shaking because that smell meant her medicine containers were gone. Cheryl stood there smiling beside the fire, holding a clipboard like she was conducting a routine inspection. "Emergency fire hazard cleanup," she explained sweetly, while workers threw our supplies into flames. $22,000 of winter preparation disappeared in one afternoon. Propane tanks popped in the fire while melted plastic from insulin storage containers dripped into toxic puddles. My mother cried quietly beside the truck, asking where her medicine boxes had gone. Cheryl insisted a 72-hour notice had been posted earlier that morning. We had left for Denver before sunrise and saw nothing on our door, but arguing beside a fire wouldn't bring back what was already destroyed. 3 days later, the bureaucratic attacks began. 4 different government complaints arrived simultaneously from 4 different agencies. Cheryl reported our food storage to the health department. Trevor claimed my propane system violated fire safety regulations. Marissa accused our generator installation of breaking electrical codes. Douglas filed environmental complaints about fuel storage. The combined fines totaled $35,000 with daily penalties. They believed pressure would force me to sell my property cheaply. What they didn't know was that I spent 20 years working around inspectors and regulations. Bureaucratic warfare cuts both directions. While they filed complaints, I spent evenings studying county property records. In the courthouse basement, I discovered something interesting buried in the original development documents. Every one of the board's luxury homes had been built inside the historic flood easement zone. Their permits depended entirely on falsified elevation certificates. The houses legally existed only because those documents claimed higher ground than reality. Meanwhile, my grandfather's deed gave me emergency authority over flood drainage whenever extreme snowmelt threatened downstream property. Winter storms piled record snow across the mountains while I quietly studied water flow calculations. February snowpack levels reached 40% above historical averages. That meant spring melt would release enormous volumes of water. The spillway system could drain 2 million gallons per hour when fully opened. I reviewed 40 years of maintenance logs documenting every previous spring flood. Each entry proved that emergency drainage had always been part of responsible water management. Meanwhile, the HOA board continued escalating complaints against my property. They even tried to convince Adult Protective Services that my mother was unsafe living with me. The investigation backfired when inspectors found detailed medical records and spotless care routines. My attorney uncovered something else during discovery that shocked even him. The HOA board had been forcing vulnerable residents to sell homes through coordinated harassment. After complaints and fines destroyed people financially, their shell company bought the properties cheaply. Pine Valley Properties LLC turned out to be secretly owned by Cheryl and her 3 allies. 6 families had already been forced out through that scheme. Federal investigators began examining the evidence for conspiracy charges. But justice in courtrooms moves slowly. Mountain snowmelt, however, moves very quickly. By early March, temperatures started climbing towards 70 degrees. Weather reports predicted the largest spring melt in Pine Valley history. I began standard spillway monitoring procedures exactly as my grandfather taught me decades earlier. Hydraulic systems hummed quietly in the basement control room waiting for orders. Cheryl scheduled a court hearing for March 15th, hoping to seize our property permanently. She even invited television reporters to cover what she expected would be my defeat. On the morning of March 15th, the temperature reached 72 degrees before 9 a.m. Snowpack across the mountains began melting faster than natural drainage could handle. At 9:45, I activated the spillway gates according to emergency protocol. Water surged through the system at 2 million gallons per hour. Within 60 minutes, the lake level dropped 18 inches, while meltwater flooded storm drains feeding lakefront basements. Cheryl was speaking to reporters when the first phone call arrived about flooding at her mansion. Trevor's contractor called seconds later, reporting water pouring into the home theater. Marissa's spa complex vanished beneath muddy snowmelt, flooding through basement windows. Douglas's vacation rental storage room turned into a shallow lake of floating furniture. Reporters captured everything live as 4 luxury homes slowly filled with water. Cheryl pointed at me, screaming that I had sabotaged the community. I calmly handed the cameras 40 years of spillway operation records. Every action matched standard emergency flood management procedures. County officials later confirmed the drainage operation prevented dangerous flooding downstream. Insurance companies discovered the falsified elevation certificates within days. All 4 claims were denied immediately. Federal investigators soon filed conspiracy and fraud charges against the entire HOA board. Pine Valley Properties dissolved under criminal investigation. Corrupt HOA collapsed, and residents formed a cooperative council instead. My lawsuit settlement rebuilt our winter supplies and funded emergency stockpiles for elderly neighbors. Today, the lake flows according to natural mountain rhythms, not the greed of corrupt board members. And every spring when snowmelt begins, I remember the day mountain water delivered justice exactly when patience made it inevitable.